Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is Pro Revenge Story. My dad just shared a story about my late Uncle Mitch, his lifelong friend and fellow engineer. So, in his memory and in spirit of the upcoming holidays, I present for you the tale of nepotism, engineering students, and Idina Menzel. Uncle Mitch was a senior engineer at a small firm in the Midwestern USA, an engineering instructor at the local community college. He was also, unofficially, in charge of the office parties. To help offset the costs, he had a small tin box on a table outside of his office with a slot in it so anyone could donate money to the party fund. Everyone knew about it and were happy to donate. A month or so before the company's big Christmas party in 2023, Uncle Mitch decided to check the box. Lo and behold, it was empty. Uncle Mitch knew something was wrong because he had seen several colleagues putting money in the box. This could only mean one thing: someone was stealing from the party fund. At this moment, Jason, the owner's nephew and a fellow engineer, came around the corner, and something about the way Jason was looking at him made Uncle Mitch suspicious. "Everything all right, Mitch?" Jason asked with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just checking the party fund," Uncle Mitch replied, studying Jason's reaction carefully. Jason didn't have a good reputation around the office, to say the least. He had a reputation of being pushy, obnoxious, rude, and just plain entitled. Unfortunately, he was not only the owner's beloved nephew, but knew how to skirt the rules so he wouldn't get fired. Uncle Mitch decided to set a trap to catch the thief. Using his engineering skills, he set up a hidden rig using a hidden doorbell camera right by the box. He then had a colleague, Tom, loudly brag about how he contributed $100 to the party fund. "Hey Mitch," Tom called out as they passed in the hallway. "Just dropped $100 in the fun box. This year's party is going to be amazing." Then Uncle Mitch waited. He got a notification that the camera was recording, and watched Jason open the empty box, scowl in disgust, and throw the box against the wall. "Damn it," Jason muttered on the video. "Nothing worth taking." Now you'd think this would end with Uncle Mitch presenting the video evidence to his boss to get Jason fired, but oh no. As I mentioned in a previous post, if there's one thing engineers love, it's solving problems. And if it's engineering students, they'll make it an experience to remember. Uncle Mitch then went to his engineering students. He offered them extra credit to come up with a rigged box that would make noise when opened. The more obnoxious the sound, the higher the bonus. "I've got an interesting challenge for you all," he told his class. "I need a donation box that creates an unforgettable audio experience when opened. Consider this a real-world application of your skills." 1 week later, they delivered their project and demonstrated how it worked. A student named Emma proudly showed off their creation. "We've outdone ourselves, Professor," she said. "Wait until you see this in action." Pleased with the results, Uncle Mitch awarded them the extra credit as promised. The next day, he set up the rigged box and proclaimed, "Well, isn't this nice? Someone donated $50 to the party fund." Then he went to his office and waited. The engineering students had rigged the box with one of those inserts from cards that play music when you open them. By popular vote, they had picked Let It Go from the Disney movie Frozen. Right around the time the song was beginning to become unpopular, they also managed to ensure that once opened, the box couldn't close unless you pressed a hidden side button releasing the hinge, so the song would continue to play. For extra funsies, they made sure to angle the insert for maximum volume and secured it down with industrial strength glue. Sure enough, everyone in the office heard Idina Menzel belting the hated song and Jason's frustrated grunts while trying to close the box. "Make it stop! How do you shut this thing up?" Jason was shouting. One of those attracted by the sound was Jason's uncle, Mr. Peterson. Finally, Jason chucked the box at the wall, managing to put a good-sized dent in it. Mr. Peterson stood there, arms crossed. "Jason, my office, now!" The uncle then summoned Jason to his office. 15 minutes later, Jason left with a cardboard box and cleared out his desk, along with a note in his file: "Do not rehire, do not recommend." So his engineering career was over. "I didn't expect you to go that far," Tom told Uncle Mitch later. "But I can't say he didn't deserve it." Uncle Mitch just smiled. Justice comes in many forms. Sometimes it sings. That Christmas, Uncle Mitch had a little video prepared to show at the party. The doorbell camera had caught Jason's attempt to steal from the box, all to the tune of Let It Go. The next one is an entitled People Story. I never thought I'd have to deal with a mother-in-law who genuinely believed she could give away property that wasn't hers, but here we are. This whole mess started about 5 years into my marriage when my wife's mother decided she knew what was best for everyone in the family, especially when it came to real estate. My wife and I had been living on a piece of land I inherited from my grandfather. It was a beautiful 3-acre plot with a modest house that we'd slowly been renovating over the years. The land had been in my family for generations, and my grandfather specifically left it to me in his will because I was the only grandkid who actually spent time with him and appreciated the property. The title was in my name only since I'd received it before we got married, and my wife was perfectly fine with that arrangement. My mother-in-law, who I'll call Karen because that's exactly the energy she brought to every situation, had always been obsessed with my property. She'd make comments every time she visited about how it was such a shame that we were wasting the potential of the land, how we should be doing more with it, how her son could really make something of the place. Her son, my brother-in-law, was a failed real estate developer who'd burned through his trust fund on bad investments and was constantly looking for his next big opportunity. Things came to a head when Karen announced at a family dinner that she'd decided to help us out. She explained that we were clearly struggling with the property and that she'd made arrangements for her son to take over. According to her grand plan, we could stay in the house as tenants, but her son would own everything and manage the property properly. She'd even had papers drawn up and presented them to us right there at the table like she was doing us the biggest favor in the world. My wife was speechless. I calmly explained that the land was mine, inherited from my grandfather, and that there was absolutely no scenario in which I'd be signing it over to anyone. Karen laughed like I'd told a joke. She insisted that since my wife and I were married, everything was community property, and that as my wife's mother, she had the authority to make decisions about family assets. The legal ignorance was staggering. I told her no, showed her the door, and thought that would be the end of it. I was incredibly wrong. Karen launched a campaign of harassment that lasted months. She'd show up unannounced with her son, giving him tours of the property and discussing renovation plans. She told our neighbors that the property was under new management. She even tried to file paperwork at the county office, claiming some kind of family transfer, which got rejected immediately because she had zero legal standing. The county clerk actually called me to give me a heads up about her attempted fraud. The breaking point came when Karen and her son showed up with a moving truck. They'd rented it with the intention of moving into my house. Karen stood on my porch and demanded that I hand over the keys immediately. When I refused, she threatened to call the police and have me removed from my own property. She kept insisting that the house was now her son's and that I needed to comply with the family decision. That's when I had my idea for malicious compliance. Karen wanted me to comply with what she perceived as her authority over my property. She wanted her son to have access to the land. She wanted to be in charge, so I decided to give her exactly what she was asking for, in the most literal way possible. I told her that if she was so certain about her son's ownership, she should go ahead and have him move in. I'd vacate immediately and let them take full possession. Karen was thrilled. She practically glowed with satisfaction at what she thought was her victory. Her son looked a bit uncertain, but went along with his mother's excitement. Here's what Karen didn't know. The property had a massive tax lien issue that I'd been carefully managing. My grandfather had taken out a second mortgage years before he died to pay for my grandmother's medical care, and there were some complicated tax situations related to the inheritance. I'd been making payments and working with lawyers to sort everything out, but it was a delicate process that required the legal owner to stay actively involved. The moment someone else tried to claim ownership or take possession without proper legal transfer, it would trigger a whole cascade of legal and financial complications. I also knew that the property needed constant maintenance that Karen and her son knew nothing about. The well system required specific care, the septic tank had to be managed properly, and there were easement agreements with neighbors that had to be honored. Plus, the county had strict regulations about occupancy and zoning that required the legal owner to maintain compliance. But the real kicker was the HOA. Yes, my rural property was technically part of a loose homeowners association that my grandfather had helped establish decades ago to maintain the shared road access. The dues were minimal, only about $50 a month, but they were mandatory and could only be paid by the deed holder. If the HOA didn't receive payment from the person they had on record as the owner, they had the right to put a lien on the property and eventually force a sale to recover costs. So I played along beautifully. I packed up some essentials and moved my wife and me to a rental property in town that I'd already arranged, just in case. I left the house keys on the kitchen counter and told Karen and her son they could have full access to everything. I even left behind my copies of the maintenance schedules and important documents, knowing they wouldn't bother reading them. Karen interpreted this as my surrender and was absolutely ecstatic. I gave it 2 weeks before I made my next move. In that time, Karen's son had moved in with his girlfriend, and they'd started treating the place like they owned it. They'd repainted rooms, rearranged everything, and even started planning major renovations. Karen had told everyone in the family and all her friends about how she'd successfully secured the property for her son. She'd posted about it on social media, calling it a family triumph. Then I filed a police report for illegal occupation of my property. I provided the deed, the title records, my tax payment history, and documentation of my inheritance. I explained that I'd allowed them temporary access, but that they'd exceeded that access and were now illegally occupying my home. I also filed a formal complaint with the county about the unauthorized renovations they'd started, which required permits they couldn't obtain because they weren't the owners. The police showed up at my house with eviction papers. Karen's son and his girlfriend were given 72 hours to vacate. Karen showed up screaming about her rights and her family's claim to the property, but the officers just looked at the documentation and told her she needed to leave or face arrest for trespassing. But here's where it got even better. During their 2 weeks in the house, they'd failed to make any of the necessary payments or maintenance. The HOA had sent notices to me as the deed holder about the missed payment, which I'd ignored as part of my plan. The septic system had backed up because they didn't maintain it properly, causing damage. They'd violated 3 different county codes with their unauthorized renovations. And because they'd been posting all over social media about owning the property and making improvements, I had documented evidence of their intentions and actions. I filed a lawsuit against both Karen and her son for property damage, illegal renovation costs, HOA fees and penalties, and emotional distress. My lawyer had a field day with the case because they'd basically documented their own illegal activity on Facebook. Karen had even posted pictures of the paperwork she'd tried to create, which demonstrated her attempted fraud. The judge was not sympathetic to their position. Karen tried to argue that she'd acted in good faith and that I'd given them permission, but I had text messages showing that I'd repeatedly told her the property was mine and that she had no legal standing. Her son tried to claim he'd been misled by his mother, but his own social media posts showed he'd been actively participating in the takeover attempt. They were ordered to pay me damages totaling about $30,000 for repairs, legal fees, and the various penalties they'd incurred. The judge also issued a restraining order preventing Karen from coming within 500 feet of my property. Her son ended up having to file for bankruptcy because he couldn't afford the judgment, and Karen's reputation in the family was completely destroyed. My wife's siblings, who'd initially stayed out of the drama, were horrified when they learned the full extent of what Karen had tried to do. Several of them cut contact with her entirely. My wife was devastated, but also relieved that the situation was finally resolved. The best part was watching Karen's face when the judge explained that by attempting to fraudulently claim ownership and by actually taking possession of the property, she'd committed several crimes and had made herself legally liable for everything that went wrong. She'd demanded that I comply with her authority, and I'd done exactly that by stepping back and letting her son take possession, knowing full well it would expose every legal and financial landmine waiting for someone who wasn't the actual owner. I moved back into my house after they vacated, fixed the damage with their court-ordered money, and never heard from Karen again. She'd wanted her son to have my property, and I'd maliciously complied by letting him try to take it, knowing the whole thing would collapse under the weight of legal reality. The first one is a petty revenge story. For context, I lived in a condo where we all have assigned parking spots, and there are several visitor spots sprinkled throughout. Well, one day I came home in the middle of a weekday, so the vast majority of parking spaces were empty. So I was very confused as to why a large, unfamiliar SUV was in my spot. Now we get the occasional visitor that mistakenly, or purposefully, parks in whatever spot they want. With this in mind, I parked right behind him and approached the window to ask him how long he was planning to be there. He said 45 minutes. I asked him if he could move to a visitor spot. There were some directly across from mine. He said no in the rudest and shrillest voice I had ever heard come out of a man. Then he started going off about how he's a realtor. He's showing this house, the door to which is directly in front of my spot. The property management said to park here in this spot. I highly doubt that. And so on and so on. I decided that I didn't have any time or energy for Karen's that day, and in the middle of his ranting, I just said, "Okay then," and walked away to go park in a visitor spot. Rude people irritate me, especially if they're defending their crappy behavior. So I promptly took my revenge. My window faces the parking lot, so I set up my speaker on the windowsill and started blasting hardcore rap music for about half an hour in the hopes that the buyer decided our quiet little community wasn't quiet enough for them. I figured the vast majority of my neighbors were at work anyway, so 30 minutes of loud music wasn't going to annoy anyone too much. I hope I wasted a bunch of his time. Maybe don't be rude to complete strangers. The next one is a malicious compliance story. So this happened a while back with a large Australian hospital. The Friday before, Xmas senior management dropped the dreaded restructure notice, standard spiel about realignment, better patient outcomes, efficient practice, blah blah blah. They give notice to the staff and unions that consultation closes first week of January. The new employment structure will take place in February. Under the conditions of our industrial award, the employer must make genuine consultation available where the employee has the opportunity to change the employer's mind about making them redundant. The other thing is, redundancy payouts are generally good in health in Australia, with a worker with 13 years work history gets a year's pay with $113,000 tax-free, plus entitlements such as annual leave and long service leave paid out. Each year you work, your redundancy increases in value to a maximum of 13 years. About 5%, 200 plus of staff are going to be made redundant. The union launches into the industrial court arguing that the time given, especially over Xmas, is insufficient. The court agrees and extends the time by 2 weeks, but issues two statements. 1, the industrial court will not slow down this restructure anymore, and 2, it strongly reminds the unions, there was multiple, that you can only consult. Hospital management see this as a big win and are bragging how they are going beat us. The unions have a combined meeting and decide that if the staff can only consult, then ask as many questions as we can. The members are asked to field as many questions as possible. My union alone gather 1,200 plus questions, with 700 of them unique. Another 900 questions coming from the other unions. As you can imagine, management does not respond well to our combined 2,000 plus questions. They attempt to push on. We head back to court where we remind the judge of his must-consult orders. The court tells our employer that they must answer the questions. The restructure is on hold by court order. What were the questions like? Some question were about legal ramifications due to industrial award requirements, others about professional legal standards, some questions about day-to-day operations, and others about how they would be personally impacted. The court orders both sides to meet back in a month, and hospital management must answer all questions. We get our answers in 3 weeks' time that consist of yes, no, maybe, possibly, and unsure answers. All one-word answers. This is not genuine consultation. We head back to court and the judge is furious about lack of real consultation. The hospital argue it's too many questions to answer, but the judge reminds them they only have to genuinely consult. Come June, we are in a legal holding pattern when hospital management declares that they are changing the restructure on feedback given and issues new restructure papers. The restructure will take place in 4 weeks' time. New restructure requires new consultation, which the hospital isn't willing to do. Back to court, the unions go to remind the judge about genuine consultation. We won again by just consulting. Come December, 1 year after starting all of this, the hospital hires a consultant to get the restructure done. She has the same attitude as hospital management and tries to rush through the restructure without genuine consultation. We head back to court, and at this stage the judge has had enough and notes the unions have played by the rules and the hospital hasn't. We hit back with even more questions, and judge decides he will set down monthly meetings with him chairing them to work through this mess. In total, the restructure takes over 3 years, with loss of a lot less jobs lost than expected. In fact, it was a fraction of jobs expected to go. In some departments, we gained jobs by arguing about workloads, etc. The vast majority of people who lost their jobs were close to retirement age and received a handsome payout. They also got 3+ years pay as the restructure took place over that time. Some of the union's members had worked less than the 13 years work history maximum payout before the restructure. The 3+ years of delay increased their payouts. All we did was consult by asking questions as the judge ordered. The next one is an entitled people story. My father passed, we were very close, and I was his primary caretaker and heir, so I followed his instructions for his funeral. He is from a remote location and wanted to be buried alongside his sibling and parents, so the funeral was held off until weather cooperated. Understanding his family is far afield, as they had moved away from this remote location, I, on my own, offered to purchase airline tickets and hotel for his nieces and nephews. I invited my mother, divorced, and my half-sister as well. I extended this offer to pay for hotel and airfare only to his nieces and nephews by name because there are 5 total and only 4 were invited due to one being a bad apple in many way. Did you know that private ferry companies can ban one guy? That fellow was the best behaved of the group because he stayed away with no drama. Just days before, less than a week, the funeral, I was informed, not asked, that his nephew was not coming, but they had decided to invite the child of his niece. They told me I met him when I was 7, I am in my 40s, and he was at the funeral of his grandmother, my aunt, a decade ago, and did not talk to us but thought my dad and I were witty. Key point here, he is a millionaire due to his father and has his own company. My husband and I are firmly middle-class wage slaves. I immediately thought they had contacted the hotel and removed the reservation for my father's nephew, whom I had apparently been introduced to once a decade ago, and prior to that had not ever had any significant interaction with, and had placed his own name with his own money. Wrong. He decided to take the room I had paid for, and then my father's niece brought her disabled son who could not understand what was happening. I honestly did not know he existed, and was told later arrangements were made for his care, but they chose to bring him. I had not booked or paid for double occupancy, raising the bill higher. One of the other nieces then avoided us for lunch to get an early ferry, got pissed when I told her she couldn't check in early just because she grabbed an early boat, and spent the night getting pissed drunk before the funeral on the second day. She also idioted because I gave my husband and myself, the only intentional double occupancy, the little backyard cabin with a kitchenette so I could cook a welcome dinner the first day. Apparently free wasn't good enough. These women are 20 years older than me, more than old enough to act like adults. I spent that first evening cooking as the hotel promised a grill, so I brought hamburgers and 2 types of sausages with sides and all the fixings, but the grill did not have the propane canister, and I had a little 1 burner and pans to make do with. I made it work by cooking for an hour. We had brought everything else with us already cooked, so it was just grilling on a flat top, time-consuming but workable. I got finished cooking and joined the party. I had a single hamburger, but had intentionally cooked all the meat I had brought, as it was a first in, first out cooking, and I knew I could eat it the rest of the stay. I had even sent out the last batch in a separate pot to market as only to be used if the rest was out, as I wanted to take those back for our lunches for the week we were there. Within half an hour of me arriving, my mother told me she was going to clean up and proceeded to try to throw away all our food. I had rotated the burgers and sausages to ensure freshest food would be left over at the end. She got all the meats, but my husband stopped her from tossing the sliced cheese and fresh veggie platters. I then had to spend yet more money to feed myself, my daughter, and my husband, as the easy grab food we had planned was trashed. The day of the funeral arrives. My half-sister is also there, making a fool of herself in a skin-tight, too small bandage-wrapped dress on an overweight body that she insisted my puritanical mother had picked out. A key point is my father had left her a significant chunk of change, even though she had refused to assist in years of care for my father at the end of his life, only contacting him when she wanted to go to his city to see a sporting event that interested her. My divorced mother helped at the very end, especially in the more personal care that he wasn't comfortable having a daughter do. In my funeral speech, I gave my cousin that helped, not the ones from earlier, and my mother credit, as they really did both help. My useless half-sister jumped in and shouted, "I'm also his daughter," when I was thanking them for helping me care for him. It was so inappropriate. The celebration of life had included pictures of her adoption, her wedding, her upbringing. I am younger, so very few pictures exist of me. She was the golden child due to illness, so she had more pictures than I did, and I was his caretaker until the bitter end. My mother had even been invited to our cabin to preview the pictures on the morning of the funeral, and my sister showed up 10 minutes before we had to leave for the funeral set up. After my mother and my husband and I had looked over the pictures, stating she knew she wasn't invited but wanted to see too. Apparently she is too important to wait until I finished getting ready. As she is the golden child, my mother immediately invited her in, so I had to stop getting ready and declare we were packing up to get her out. She liked to be violent without consequences, not just to me, she was a bully that tormented others, so I don't like being anywhere near her. I never got the chance to compose myself for putting my dad in the ground because my sister was too important to help with the funeral or even let me keep my schedule. Then at the funeral, the one thing she wasn't included in was the thanks for caring for him because she refused when asked repeatedly, but that is still not good enough, so she had to shout out at a funeral to get attention back to her when it was distributed amongst family that actually cared for him. She also wandered up right after my mother and I placed his urn and took a picture of his open grave. It was awful. So much more happened, so much more stress during that time. You don't want to do work on your home with an HOA, but my sister and my cousins are pretty much dead to me. I paid for their hotel and airline tickets and don't intend to fund anything for them ever again. I hate people and have gone from low contact to no contact. Oh, and my mother's niece managed to hit me up for money as one of the cousins that ignores me is getting married. They, of course, did this the day after my father's funeral without even offering condolences. They never contact me unless they want a present. It is really gross. The next one is an entitled parent story. This afternoon, I, M19, was biking on a cycle path in my town when I found this kid, F11, in front of me. I was in a bit of a hurry and she was pretty slow, so I decided to overtake her. Obviously, I wasn't speeding or anything. I had just restarted after stopping and was approaching some poles, which you need to slow down in order to avoid. Also, I'm no professional cyclist and my bike is pretty heavy, but this is where I could have possibly ducked up. For the whole time she was in front of me, she stayed in the right lane of the cycle path, and this led me to believe that I could have overtaken her simply by going into the left lane without ringing my bell. Apparently, I was wrong, because the moment I was next to her while overtaking her, she randomly got into the left lane and hit my bike, which made us both fall. The moment I realized we fell, I immediately asked her multiple times if she was fine, but she didn't answer, and the first thing she did was calling out for her dad. The dad, who wasn't around to see anything about the situation, randomly appeared on a moped on the end of the cycle path and immediately started laying into me, going on about how much of an idiot I am for being such a danger on a public road. Now, I don't blame him for this. Your kid just got hurt and you don't know how it happened, so you're obviously not going to be perfectly calm, but it's how he acted later that made me decide to post this story here. He wanted to get the police involved and asked his daughter, who was crying but standing up with no problem, if she needed an ambulance, which I find kind of an overreaction, TBH, but maybe I'm just not an expert in these sorts of situations. He then asked me for an ID, but he refused to accept the one I gave to him, even if it had all of the data he asked me for. So I asked my mom to come with my ID and help with handling the situation. The moment he was sure that his daughter was fine, he instantly became way more worried about money and the bike than caring for his kid, and he left the both of us to be taken care of by a poor bystander who was kind enough to give us first aid. The rest of the story is pretty tame. My mom showed up with my ID, settled things with him with insurance and everything, and they left. The kid was fine, she just has some scratches on her back and was scared by the whole thing. Her bike also doesn't have any problems. The basket is just a bit off to the side and it has a couple scratches, even though the dad said I destroyed it when I put him on the phone with my mom, LMAO. I've taken a bit more damage as I have a scraped knee, a bunch of scratches on my left arm, and my bike probably needs some fixings and replacements now. Also, my phone is bent in a weird way as it was in my pocket when I fell, but it still works just fine. I needed to change it soon anyways. It's unlikely that anything will happen to me because the bystander told me and my mom that he clearly saw the kid running into me while the dad wasn't around to supervise her, so I'm not really worried about that anymore. While I obviously feel bad for the kid, I also think that the whole thing really isn't a big deal. I mean, kids do dumb stuff all the time, and I should have been a bit more careful, but the dad really rubbed me the wrong way. He really seemed more worried about getting compensation than actually interested in how her daughter was doing, and when the whole thing ended, he still asked her if she felt good enough to bike back home instead of driving her or something. Also, she kept swearing in front of him, which, even if she was tense, if I had said those words in front of my parents at her age, the bike fall would have been the least of my problems. So, yeah, sorry for my rant, but what was up with that dad, LOL? I will keep you updated if anything else happens. Anyway, thank you for watching.